Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to finish up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to listen to. If you have your own special selection you'd like to submit, you can do so in the link in the description. Today's special selection comes at us from Christopher. Thornhill, Where We Go Where We Die. Where we go when we die. There we go. Got a little bit of that Dr. Seuss thing going on. Yeah, so let's dive into this. I don't think I've ever heard this band before. Don't even have a reference compared to the name. So let's just dive in and see what's going on. I have a little bit of a ambient noise thing. I can't really detect any emotion yet. It's just sound at this moment. That right cymbal is overpowering everything. Okay, I'm here for these vocals. Oh, we had a rhythmic change there. Yeah, I think the snare changes its accented beat every couple bars. Yeah, there's just some really cool drumming right here. It's subtle. Yeah, it's a small amount of drums, snare, bass, a couple of toms in the fill, but a cymbal, and it's very expressive. I love it. Yeah, pairing the tension of the vocals with a single tone in the guitars. Oh man, ugh. Oh, we had a delayed strike there. Really digging into the eeriness in the chords here. Aiming for a little bit of instability against this very melodic line in the vocals. those little moments where hitting those higher notes and just kind of punctuating that moment within the melody. Interesting. I've never heard of these guys, and they are kind of right up my alley. Really groovy stuff. Phenomenal, phenomenal vocal work. Nice mix between melodic and textural stuff. I mean, there's been name written all over it, and I've never heard these guys before. Um, yeah, I think this is gonna be like Greyhaven, where this evening I'm gonna dive into this album and just walk out the other side really happy I did so. Um, so yeah, so a lot of the song is kind of worked around this pop idea, right? The vocals are very poppy and catchy. A lot of the guitar stuff is more aimed at that sonoristic rule of cool. If it sounds sick, we're gonna play it, right? There isn't a lot of melodic work going on in the guitar work, and the drums I'm gonna save for the last, I think, but there's a subdued ingenuity to it, and it makes it so it's palatable but also technical, and I absolutely love that combination right there. I think that's my favorite idea for pretty much anything as far as music goes, whether it's guitar work or melodic work or strings, whatever. I love that balance where it's still easy enough to understand if you don't know what's going on. It's groovy or it has a nice melody. It's pleasant to listen to. But if you understand what's going on, it has that extra layer of depth that you can kind of get more information out of and understand it on that second level. I think that right there is the sweet spot for me for a lot of composition styles. And the drums just right here, man. That's me. I love the drumming here so much. But the drums and the guitar, they really don't take the spotlight at all in the song, aside from no, they really don't take the spotlight at all. The drum has a couple of fills, the guitar has a couple of moments, but usually it's an introductory moment into uh, passing the spotlight on to the vocals. It's more of introducing an idea, such as the beginning of the bridge before the screams came in, the fries. The guitars had like 4 bars to introduce the section. That was really the only time that they had the spotlight, and it wasn't even given the spotlight in the production. Their volume, their EQ, their mix was all identical between when they introduced it and when the vocals came in. So they weren't given the spotlight, they just had the spotlight because they were the most prominent idea in the section. If the vocals had been going at the time, the vocals would have had the spotlight, definitely. The vocals are the key thing, the main event, I suppose you could call it, throughout the entire song, which, again, just kind of lines up with that pop idea here. And I don't mean pop as in pop music, although a lot of these ideas do show up in pop music. I just mean popular music, whether it's country or rock or hip hop or pop. Um, it's this idea of simplicity in song structure, chord progression. A lot of it deals with rule of cool. There is not a lot of technical aspect in a lot of popular music, and giving a spotlight to the vocalist. And a lot of those things are present here. And because of that, I want to touch on the vocals first. I think there's some really cool things going on. First of all, the range is just impressive. Right off the bat, we get some really high notes in the opening verse, and I'm already blown away. I'm ready for this ride. It becomes a little stereotypical at times, but I mean, this is what this is. I absolutely love the style of vocals here. and he hit everything I was expecting. So I can't really complain much, but yeah, just starting it off real strong there. I do want to point specifically to the chorus though, because I pointed out there at the end, but I want to give it a little bit of spotlight here. I love those punctuated high notes within the phrasing. So he kind of sifts around this range, maybe 3 or 4 notes wide, for the majority of the chorus, but it's always punctuated with this octave hit in the middle of the phrase. And I don't know if it has any musical necessity to it. It's kind of divergent in the way that we have this smooth, like if you ignore it, we can see this roller coaster ride with the way that he comes up and he comes back down at the end of lines, and then he goes back up when he begins the next line and comes back down. We get this nice roller coaster. But when you bring in the high note, it kind of levels out all that stuff on the lower end, and it's a smaller movement with this big jump and then a smaller movement because of the scale, right? The scale of this graph has changed. So it changes the way that the section feels. It doesn't feel like it has natural flow. It feels like it's rather stationary until these massive leaps. And I'm going to be interested to see if any of that shows up in the lyrics. Because it is interesting how that one single note, especially when done so often, I believe it's every single phrase, can drastically change the way a line feels. Then there's just a bunch of other variety with the vocals. We have harshes, we have some of that choir-esque, multi-layered harmonies going on. The dude's just a really talented vocalist, and I think he actually has two kind of harshes, if I remember right. One that was more of like a compressed clean, and then one that was a full-on fry scream, and it's just really impressive on all fronts. I do want to talk a little bit about the guitars because they mostly do one thing throughout this entire song. They set the atmosphere, they set the stage for everything else to happen. And sometimes they do this through chords. We see that at the beginning of the song. There's a bit of a chord progression through the verse, and it provides us some information into what the emotions and atmosphere of the song, what it's going to be, what we should expect to feel while listening to this track. I will say it's a bit ambiguous to begin with. A lot of our information in this realm is mostly dictated by the vocals, the way they're delivered, the words that are said. But the guitars, I think, do an alright job at kind of keeping everything grounded with the chord progression. But then we get some of the sections like the bridge. When we get into more of a rhythmic structure, we get singular notes that are syncopated rhythmically and have this disjointed, heavy element to it. And of course, like I mentioned with the bridge, they come in before the vocals do, and they introduce the section. They let us know what kind of emotions we're going to be feeling here. And this is something we see a couple of times throughout the song with the guitars leading. Sometimes it's just a beat, sometimes it's a full bar, sometimes it's a full phrase, 4 bars, to let us know what kind of vibe we're in for. But the drums, this is what I want to talk about most right here, because this was just phenomenal. The drums could have stuck with a simple alternating bass and snare on the beat and having a cymbal hit on every beat, right? And I think that would have worked just fine. In fact, I wouldn't have really noticed if they had done that instead. It would have just made the drums a bit more invisible since they followed something more standardized. But because of what the drummer did, especially at the beginning, I mentioned that it seemed like every couple of bars, I don't remember if this was the intro or the first verse, I'd mentioned that every couple of bars it felt like we were emphasizing different beats. And it could have been that we were switching from downbeats to offbeats. But something was changing this up. And by the end of it, I'd figured out that it was the drums. The snare in particular. The snare was giving us some accented hits, and it was switching it up here and there. And it started to make me pay more attention to what the drummer was doing. And we got into the next section, which was a bit lighter. And just the little touches with how the cymbal was utilized against the bass and the snare, which were doing some syncopated stuff. It wasn't just alternating beats. Um, and it's something simple. Like if you had just done the bass and the bass kick and the snare alternating, doing their syncopated idea, that would have been fine. If you had just done alternating beats with that and the little embellishments on the cymbals, that would have been fine. But when you bring them together, especially with the way that the phrasing seemed to be different, it was almost a bit of a polyrhythmic idea. But I don't think it was full on polyrhythm. I think it just happened to do with phrasing differentiations. And it creates this heavily layered, textured, uh, rhythmic aspect to the song that feels like it's constantly changing, right? You can feel the rhythm of the cymbals, you can feel the rhythm of the snare and bass kick, but when they come together, it feels like they're just out of sync. But then other moments they're coming back into sync, and it feels like there's this changing vibe of whether we're accenting downbeats or offbeats, whether they're working together or against each other, and I just absolutely love it. And it's a minor thing, right? Like I said, if either of these elements had been done in isolation, it wouldn't have really stood out. They're nice on their own, but they're not really too ear catching. But when you bring them together and the way that they synchronize and desynchronize with each other rapidly, it's not like something that happens over several bars. They come back together every 2 bars or something like that. It's a very short desync, but it's does a lot for telling the story and providing something interesting rhythmically for the ears to listen to, especially in this quiet section where the guitars are mostly doing chordal stuff and the melody is kind of sitting closer to a fairly palatable pop style of melodic phrasing. There's nothing really interesting going on there. So to allow the drum to be expressive in this moment is huge. I think it really helps, or it really elevates this section from being just a quiet part of the song to contrast other parts with, to being a unique aspect of the song that stands on its own, plus provides the contrast to some of the larger and louder elements. It's also interesting to listen to the drummer take this idea, this expressive drumming, and transform it when we get to some of the heavier sections where he has to play a bit more rigid to bring this weight down, right? Because part of the expressiveness kind of gives a weight, or kind of removes the weight. It provides an element of levity, almost like a tap dancer or a ballerina. You're getting all these little nuances within it that doesn't feel like this big clunking machine. It doesn't carry weight to it. It actually does the opposite. And to listen to the drummer bring in something a bit more rigid in that bridge section, it's just really cool to see, much like the vocalist, a drummer with such width that they can cover so many different styles and feel at home in all of them. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say because, like I said, this is sort of a very palatable. Uh, I don't want to say music by numbers, but it did hit a lot of stereotypes that I love in this style of music, including the idea of soft versus heavy, a breakdown in the bridge, and even some of the tropier elements of transitions, like having a beat of silence into a big punch on beat one. Um, but I do want to bring up one element in the production that I think was phenomenal before we move into the lyrics, which was during the breakdown, they had they had that beat four break where it's just a big sting, just like everybody hits with a really um, sharp accent, and then they just kind of let that sound echo before coming in on beat one heavy again, and kind of having that space, that reverb, to kind of feel the emptiness as if they didn't hold these notes out. Just get that real quick staccato hit, and then the reverb that comes off of it. But there was one time when instead of doing that, they allowed that note to fade out, and then the next note faded in, and it was sick. It was this, oh, it felt like being in a vortex, where there was no ends or beginnings to anything. It's just things slowly became silence, and silence slowly became other things. And that was a phenomenal inversion of that idea I just talked about the real sharp staccato note with the real punchy attack on beat one, and getting those sharp transitions from one idea or one note to the next. This was the opposite of that, where we get these smooth transitions, but it's a transition still to silence and back out of. And yeah, really expecting them to repeat the abrupt staccato idea, and getting this instead was phenomenal. But also, even in isolation, I think it's a really interesting way to go about doing the same idea in a different light. And it caught me off guard, which is cool. I'm going to take a second to dive into the lyrics here, and we'll see what's going on there. Okay. What is with this week being the heavy lyrics week? Two Silent Planet songs, the Muse track. Man, even the Swans track was heavy lyrically. Just. Okay. So this one, again, kind of lining up with what we just checked out with Silent Planet. On the previous 2 days, we have this theme of time ending, the frailty of humanity, and a concept of paradise, which kind of lines up with what we looked at with, was it Megalomaniac or Megalomania? Why is there's so many through lines with the lyrics? Man, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around all the coincidences, but this one seems to be about the frustration and anger with the way that the world is decaying naturally. Um, the first verse brings in this concept of time that I think we've talked about way too often this week. Can you believe that our time ends now? Just face the fact we all live till we drown. Just come on, why? So many songs making me face my mortality. You see, they made it all for show. Everything you see, everywhere we go. Kind of putting up the makeup that things are not as bad as they seem. Whether it's misinformation or straight up telling lies, or even just beautifying things that are decaying. This, I think, is where I first started to uh, put together the idea of what this was talking about. It says hybrid lungs in an opaque light, green offset, bleeding out the night. And I'm pretty sure this is talking about pollution. The hybrid lungs is making me think of possibly filters being needed to exist on Earth, possibly just to simply go outside. You would need a filter to see the opaque light. So opaque is something you can't see through. Light is something we typically can see through. So this would be a light that has been polluted to a point that it is difficult to see through. Green offset bleeding out the night reminds me of like a green smog. That kind of ties into this idea of an opaque light. Even when it is daytime, it's difficult to see. And kind of brings back to the idea of the opaque light, opaque lungs, the hybrid lungs, where if you want to go out into this polluted air, you would need, a filter. You would need to use your lungs with another set of air filtration system. Um, let's see. There's a couple of things in here that just kind of continue to dig into some of this stuff, talking about how um, the world is slowly fading. Calls it the world of the dead at one point. Um, there's one line that I really like. It says, "If I burn, would you let me die?" And I'm not sure if that's more of a metaphorical thing of, needing slave labor, so to speak, to, even if I burned, would you let me would you let me actually pass on to the next life, or would you try to keep me here so I can continue to slave away? Um, What's also interesting is that this is a series of verses. I think I mentioned a chorus earlier on, but there's actually no repeated lines, nothing to physically call, or actually nothing to literally call a chorus. But there is a verse 5 that I like. No, sorry, the bridge. He says, "You speak of a world I knew before we lost the air. You all know the lie and you let it die. You speak of paradise like it exists forever." And I think that this is directly speaking to the people who have the power or the money to save the world and are choosing not to, possibly in some cases to even ignore it altogether. He even goes on to say, "They all made you believe, but I don't think I want to." Well, what's the point of life if we can't be together? And that's just the idea of, humanity is a single race. We are one people. We are all the same. And he says, what's the point of humans ruling the earth, of being the highest level of organism on the planet, if we've still found a way to separate ourselves? And not only that, but we found a way to separate ourselves not just by region, but also by class and by wealth and by power, and that how that power has not corrupted just the earth naturally, but has corrupted the earth socially, corrupted the earth in ways that extends beyond just the physical element of the earth. We've corrupted it to a way that we can't even see our neighbor as an equal. Um, and so there's a lot of anger in this song. There's a lot of finger pointing, and I mean, I agree with it, man. It's like, again, another song that speaks straight to me. And I think that it works also because when we look at how the song progresses, we start with a single noise. Like I said, it wasn't really betraying its emotion. It was not a chord. It was more of just a note, or maybe a group of notes, microtonally, that was creating this sound, this humming, this buzzing, and it evolves into the opening track, or the opening part of the song, the opening verse. Very palatable section. Right? We have some chords, we have some light drumming, we have some beautiful, clean vocals coming through, but they're not airy, right? They're not sort of low effort. He definitely sounds like he's pushing his range a little bit. I wouldn't say he's strictly chest, probably chest head mixed, and getting a lot of power behind these words. There's some conviction in there, and as the song progresses towards the end, we get heavier and heavier. The vocals become more powerful until they become a scream. The guitars switch off from just being in the background as chord stuff to taking these lead rhythmically syncopated lines. We move from these long hold notes, just kind of passively holding on to these notes, becoming more active, bringing about rhythmic aspect to these instruments that have just kind of sat in the background for a lot of this time. The drums move from being more expressive to more weighty. They're not there to provide levity, they're there to provide the weight of the situation. And all these elements come together to increase the tension and intensity of the song to match the words that are being said. There comes a point where it's not so much about conviction anymore, it's about having your words heard. It's about screaming at the top of your lungs that there's a problem. We've tried to do it peacefully. Now you're going to hear me roar. And just hearing the escalation in not just the words themselves, but also in the music, it is a beautiful way of basically creating a 5 minute long crescendo, not necessarily smooth crescendo from beginning to end, but there is this rising intensity, rising volume, rising power that goes from the beginning of the track to the end. And of course, the end of the track ends with a fade out into like a single note, not too different from the beginning. And it just, man, that's defeating. I don't know if that's exactly what they were going for, but it feels like they had given up. And instead of ending the song on the most powerful note, they ended it on a whimper. And that could mean a lot of things. It could mean that they're defeated and have given up. We've seen that with generations before. And it could also mean that their words have provoked the wrong people and they no longer have the ability to speak out against the injustices that they believe they're seeing. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm digging this. Like I said, the sound itself, right up my alley. This reminds me of a lot of the pop emo post hardcore kind of area that I've listened to a lot when I was a teenager. Um, the vocal style's right up my alley. I love the expressive drumming, and then I'm really jiving with these lyrics too. They're very poetic. I think there's a nice rhythm to them, and it all just comes together to push this single idea, and I'm here for it. This is where you guys come in though. Hit me up with your thoughts on this track. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, if there's anything you think I missed, anything that I should expand upon, go ahead and let me know. When you're done commenting, you can head up to the description box, and in there is a link for Linktree, which will take you to this menu here with everything related to the channel. You can submit your own special selection. You can join the Patreon and vote on future themes and songs. You can join the Discord community. You can follow me on Twitter. You can pick up some merch. There's just a lot of stuff. Go ahead and check it out above the description box if you could. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. That's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow with the last stuff for this week. We're going to check out our final otherworldly track, and we're going to check out a creator request. That'll all be at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.